It's a dangerous and scary journey. Thousands of unaccompanied children, mostly from Central American countries like Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador, flooding into Texas through Mexico. They're so huge, the federal government is now overwhelmed. They're actually being held by the U.S. in detention centers and often held in cramped spaces. Homeland Security Chief Jay Johnson says he is talking with ambassadors from those Central American countries about returning many of these children as soon as possible. Let's bring in our legal guys, Avery Friedman, a civil rights attorney and law professor in Washington, D.C. today, and Richard Herman, a New York criminal defense attorney and law professor, joining us from Las Vegas. Good to see you, gentlemen.
Hi, Frederica.
Hi, Fred.
Okay, so help folks understand. So under federal law, immigrants from these countries are treated differently than immigrants from Mexico or Canada. In fact, let's take a look to help folks understand better. U.S. law prohibits the Department of Homeland Security from immediately deporting the children if they are not from Canada or Mexico. Children are turned over to the Department of Health and Human Services supervision within 72 hours of being taken into custody. Immigrants are given a court date, but very few actually show up, and the children often become one of the millions of undocumented immigrants in the U.S. So Avery, does this law have the unintended effect of encouraging immigrants to come here, because a lot of these kids from Central American countries are being told that they do have special status and they will eventually be accepted into the U.S. system?
Well, maybe, maybe not, Frederica. The reality is that it is time to develop a policy that means something. The president has authority, has discretion to deal with this, but ultimately it's got to be underwritten by Congress. The fact is, here in Washington, there are 400,000 Central Americans living. It will be a magnet for bringing these children in. And we are Americans. We are a humanitarian people. But the crisis exists not because of what's coming from the administration, but the failure of Congress to enact meaningful immigration policy. That's where the problem is, and that's where we're stuck right now.
So then, Richard, help us understand, when we hear the stories of some of these young people, some of the Central American children coming in, they may have a relative, like the one young man and woman whose family had a brother in Washington, D.C., because that person is able to establish, I have a relative who does reside in the United States, I can now get on a bus after illegally crossing into the border, because I'm from any number of these Central American countries, and get on a bus and go to this city where my relative is, and it's expected that I then follow the process to see if I can get the proper paperwork to allow me to stay here. Help us understand how this works and why it is set up this way.
Well, there's a law, Fred, the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, which allows for this procedure to take place. But basically, these children have only two options. One, apply for asylum, or two, go through the immigration court process. And what happens is, if they select the immigration court process, they end up having a court date. Many of them don't show up for the court date.
Because they're likely afraid that it means being deported or sent
deportation, right?
From back to the place where they fled.
Right, and they join the 11 million undocumented citizens in the country. So what happens is, if they go to court, they need a lawyer. Most of them don't have a lawyer. They have the burden of proof, so they have to get up there and speak in a process which they have no idea what they're doing. But Fred, for a country that cloaks itself and prides itself with a humanistic philosophy and takes pride in shrines like Ellis Island and the great communicators' words, take down that wall, the Congress is paralyzed in this issue, and with Cantor losing the election, the prospect of true and any kind of immigration reform is basically dead at this point. It's a tragedy. These facilities, some of them are put in detention centers that are deplorable. It's a true crisis, Fred.
Well, but they're not.
Someone has to stand up.
Border Patrol officers are not social workers, and that's part of the problem. If Congress doesn't underwrite protection, what are you going to do with what will be 90,000 children coming into the United States? You can't send them back to Central America. It's not like Canada or Mexico, as you identified.
But isn't it complicated there too, that many people are just coming with the shirts on their backs? They don't have documentation that says I'm from Honduras, El Salvador. You got to believe me when I say I'm not from Mexico, so you got to treat me, under these special conditions.
Exactly,
so I mean, it just seems like a real mess.
Yeah, they're not coming with birth certificates. They're not coming with passports. They're coming.
come with nothing.
Children are with nothing, and they're dying in the desert to make this trek. I mean, can imagine why they're leaving, Fred. Imagine the violence and poverty that they're seeking to leave. They're coming here, and what are we doing?
Yeah,
It's a
great risk.
tragedy, and no one's acting here. And so people are pressing President Obama, use executive action, do something.
That's what he's
That's all
doing.
he has to do. Yeah,
That's
but
exactly
use more
what's going
executive
on.
action. Right.
Well, clearly,
Something
clearly
has to be done.
no easy answers here. Guys, I appreciate it. And of course, our Rosa Flores is actually in Central America in one country, and she'll, help us see exactly what it is so many of these young people are risking their lives in which to flee, and why their families are willing to put a 4-year-old, in the face of danger to
Unbelievable how
cross
bad it
the
is.
border without a
Unbelievable.
parent. It is unbelievable. Thanks so much. Avery, Richard, appreciate it.
Thanks,
Always
Julia.
love your point.